of 1799. In a small coastal town in Maine, a voice rose up from a cellar and claimed to be the dead wife of a sea captain. Over the next few months, more than 100 people would say they heard that voice. Others would swear that they saw the woman that it belonged to, a lady in glowing white, bright enough to light up a room. Her name? Nelly Butler. This is just not another ghost story. In fact, many historians call it the first truly documented haunting in the United States. So welcome to the land of the Shadow People, a podcast that walks up to the edge of history and the paranormal. And today's journey takes us to Sullivan, Maine, along the rocky shores of Taunton Bay, where a young woman died in childbirth. And if you believe the witnesses, return to reshape the lives of the living. This is the reported true story of the Nelly Butler haunting, a love story, tragedy, and a case that still blurs the line between miracle, manipulation, and mass belief. To understand the ghost, we have to understand the woman. Eleanor Nelly Hooper Butler was the young wife of Captain George Butler, a mariner living at the place that came to be known as Butler's Point in the late 1700s. Nelly was young, about 21 when she died, in and around 1797, unfortunately during childbirth, leaving George widowed and grieving in his coastal Maine home. The land was harsh, the winters long, and death was never far away. But what happened next was not ordinary, even for the 18th century. 2 years after Nelly's burial, a different family became the center of the story. Captain Abner Bastel, his wife, and the children living near what is now known as Taunton Drive in Sullivan. Their 15-year-old daughter, Lydia, would soon find herself at the heart of something that looked to some like a haunting and to others a carefully orchestrated nightmare. In the winter of 1799, the Bastels began hearing strange noises from the cellars. It started with knocks, raps, and sounds like distant conversations that they couldn't quite make out. At first, it was unnerving, a mystery in the dark, right underneath their feet. And then on January 2nd, 1800, the mystery spoke back. When Abner demanded to know who was there, a disembodied voice answered, "I am the dead wife of Captain George Butler, born Nelly Hooper." The voice wasn't just random noises. It responded, it argued, and it quoted scripture. It also singled out Lydia as the person it most wanted to talk to. Beds would shake, doors slammed, objects flew, and the cellar became a stage for long conversations between the living and the dead. Very quickly, this wasn't about proving that there was a ghost. The spirit said it had a mission. It wanted George Butler, Nelly's widower, to marry 15-year-old Lydia. In this era, a girl marrying at 15 or 16 wasn't unheard of, but a match of this type was controversial. Abner, her father, and others in the town opposed the idea, suspicious both of the age gap and the idea of a dead woman now arranging marriages from beyond the grave. But the ghost pressed on. It flattered George, comforted Lydia, and appealed to religious language about providence, the afterlife, and obedience to God's will. It wasn't shy about calling out doubters, either by naming skeptics and insisting that they come to the cellar so it could prove itself in front of them. What sets the Nelly Butler case apart is how public it became. This wasn't one person seeing a figure at the foot of their bed. No, this was dozens of neighbors crammed into a cellar listening to a voice in the dark. Over time, more than 100 people in and around Sullivan would claim that they saw or heard the specter. Some described a female figure in shining white, bright enough to illuminate the cellar or even a room at night. In one dramatic account, witnesses say that George Butler reached out his hands and passed through the apparition, as if touching smoke that held the shape of a woman. For many of those present, that moment turned the haunting from rumor into reality and made the ghost's demands much harder to ignore. Under growing pressure from the spectral matchmaker and the community buzzing with supernatural gossip, George Butler and Nelly Butler finally agreed to marry. The wedding took place in May of 1800 near Butler's Point, where George had once lived with Nelly. The day after the marriage, the apparition returned with a new message, this time darker. Witnesses reported the spirit warning George, "Be kind to your wife." It is said that she would not be with him long. She would bear one child and then die. According to the records, Lydia became pregnant and later gave birth to a child. And of course, unfortunately, she passed away at the young age of 16. For many believers, this sealed the ghost's credibility as a prophetic force. For others, it felt less like a blessing from beyond and more like a curse. The haunting did not stop with the wedding, or even with Lydia's death. In August 1800, the phenomenon intensified and moved beyond the cellar. On one famous night, the specter reportedly summoned critics and skeptics by name, appearing outside the house, speaking on religious themes, and leading a nighttime procession. Around 48 people are said to have followed the glowing form for more than a mile through the dark. From the Butlers' home, to a neighbor's house, and then into a field. There, the figure appeared again to the gathered crowd, demonstrated, at least to them, that it was not bound to any one place, and then vanished. After that August night, reports of the ghost of Nelly Butler largely stopped. Years later, a congregational minister named Reverend Abraham Cummings traveled to Sullivan to investigate the story. Cummings, a Harvard-educated, deeply religious, and was fascinated by what was possible proof of life after death. He interviewed more than 30 eyewitnesses, gathered their testimony, dates, and descriptions into a detailed narrative. He eventually published the accounts in a work titled Immortality, proved by the testimony of sense, framing the Nelly Butler case as evidence that spirits in a Christian afterlife were real. Because of his documentation and a large number of witnesses, the Nelly Butler haunting is often called America's first documented ghost story or first documented haunting. That label doesn't mean anyone agreed on what happened necessarily, but it does mean this case left a paper trail that most ghost stories never get. So what was the Nelly Butler haunting? Believers still point to a number of witnesses to report of physical manifestations and Lydia's death as a sign that something generally supernatural is at work. On the other hand, skeptics have other ideas. Some suggest a deliberate hoax, perhaps involving ventriloquism, social pressure, or someone speaking from the hidden spaces within the house. Others see elements of what today might be called a poltergeist case, centered around an anxious adolescent girl in a highly religious, close-knit community. There are also other possibilities of mass suggestion. Town primed by frontier hardship, evangelical belief, and gossip, ready to experience something extraordinary together. In that reading, the haunting becomes a mirror, reflecting the fears, hopes, and power struggles of Sullivan, Maine at the dawn of the 19th century. Today, Sullivan and the surrounding Hancock County still embrace their ghost story. Local historical societies reference the case. Modern researchers have traced family lines, found George Butler's gravestone, and republished the original documents. Podcasts, tours, books revisit the tale, presenting its founding American haunting. Part history, part folklore, part ongoing mystery. More than 2 centuries later, the question remains: was Nelly's spirit really speaking from the shadows? Or were the shadows speaking through the people of Sullivan? In Land of the Shadow People podcast, every story leaves us with something unresolved. In Sullivan, Maine, that unresolved thing sounds like a voice in a dark cellar answering simple questions of who's there, a name, or with the name that should have stayed in the grave. If you enjoyed this journey into America's first documented haunting, share this episode, leave a review, and let the world know that you're walking with us here in the shadows. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, and remember, some stories don't stay buried. Until next time.